I want to begin dealing with another example of how hidden motives are revealed through using the 10-step process. And this is just a little bit different because I want to work with this problem of very, very bright kids. They present a special problem. They have so much potential. And many times in school, they're able to do so well without any effort because they're just bright enough to learn things. But when the effort becomes required, they begin to fail. Usually, or sometimes anyway, these kids are told from a very early age just how bright they are. When they have to start putting out effort, they begin, unfortunately, some of them begin to question either their intelligence or they begin to question other aspects of themselves and back down from challenge. I want to tell you about one child because dealing with the very bright kids can be a special problem. And by the way, this particular youngster also had a learning disability, even though he was extremely bright. I'll talk about learning disabilities toward the end of the program. This particular youngster had come to me because he had a consistent pattern. His grades ranged from C's to B's, but how he created those grades was very unusual. He would start off every grading period doing really well. Then his grades would crash to nothing. I mean, he would be making A's and they would go all the way to F's because he wouldn't turn anything in and would sabotage everything. Now, of course, he had every excuse in the book. I forgot. I don't know what's going on. The school's boring. The teachers don't like me. He had every excuse you could imagine. And then he would struggle and bring those grades up to a C. This gave his parents quite a dilemma because compared with other kids, his grades seemed okay. There were C's, some B's, and if he was especially interested in a class, of course, he would make the A. He was interested in things like the weather, but in the classes on the weather, he did well in, but when it turned to other aspects of science, he would sometimes fail. Now, he never actually failed a class for a semester, but he never reached anywhere near his potential. As we began to work with him, he began to have moments where he would sabotage his mother. For instance, she would get very involved and would organize his notebooks. But 3 days later, they would be totally disorganized, and then he would blame her because she didn't do it right. That's the problem, of course, with being an over-involved parent. You get blamed for both the good grades and the bad ones. We weaned the mother out of the picture because that's what she wanted, but he was very dependent on her. And I was working with him and was teaching the father how to step in and work with this young man. Now, he's in all accelerated classes. And as I work, he begins to ask himself the questions I've been asking him. When he would sabotage his grades, I'd say, what's going on inside of you? What do you believe you're thinking? What are you feeling that's creating this problem? And he began to introspect. When kids start to introspect, you have really helped them. He kept asking the question over and over again, why am I doing this to myself? I don't understand. Why am I doing this to myself? So every week, we'd focus on those problems. Why is he doing this to himself? Now you can see it's gone from already by using the 10 steps. It went from it's boring, it's somebody else's problem but mine, to the inside, why am I doing this to myself? And those are the kinds of things we want to see. One day he has the most profound realization. And he's very anxious all throughout. When we were exploring his thoughts and feelings, we reached that sort of open-hearted communication that you sometimes reach, that sort of fourth level with his father in the room. He said something like this. He looked at his father and said, do you know what it's like to be told all your life that you can do anything you want, that you're that bright? He said, it's the loneliest feeling you can imagine. I'll start making A's and I feel like I'm getting so far out there that I'll never be around anyone. I'll never be able to relate to anybody. So I purposely fail. I can see that now, he said. I just fail. Now I have my limits. Now I have something to overcome. So then I can pull that F up to a C. I actually feel good. At that point, we began to discuss limits. What are the realistic limits? When you pick up a homework assignment, that's a limit. Can you do it? Are you going to do it? Are you going to turn it in or not? Over time, this young man brought his grades from C's, B's, to consistently high B's. In fact, he began to understand his pattern. One time he came in to me toward the end of his high school career, and he just wanted a little checkup, so he came in on his own. And he said, Dr. Whitley, I want to let you know that I've been doing it to myself this year. You know, I've never really given the all-out effort because I'm still afraid of it. The first 6 weeks I made all 89s in every class. And you see, Dr. Whitley, in an accelerated program, if you make A's, it really counts more than A's. Your grade point average goes way up because it's counted as more than an A. So I had all 89s. I didn't make it. Well, the next 6 weeks, I had all 89s again. And I realized it's the same problem. I'm just doing it to myself at a higher level. Now, I didn't see him again until he went off to college. He went to the University of Texas, which has something called Plan 2, which is their honors program. He had gotten in it, not based on grades, but on his SAT scores. Now, Plan 2 is like just any of the top colleges in the country. That's what they're planning to do with that kind of program. And he told his mother when he left, he said, I think for the first time in my life, I'm really ready to push myself now and see what I'm really able to do. Now remember, he's also learning disabled. He goes off to the University of Texas and he makes a 4.0. It's the highest, all A's, his freshman year. And he comes back in to see me. And he said, I've really changed as a human being. I'm not afraid of achievement anymore. I liked what I was able to do. Now those are some of the special problems with kids who are extremely bright because they become afraid of being cut off from others because of their intelligence. And if you've ever worked with gifted and talented kids, they will sometimes have those problems because they are so bright. And that's one of the ways you work with them is to help them feel connected to you by having them talk to you at that deeper communication level. That's what level 3 and 4 does. It connects kids to you at an emotional level, and it helps them feel independent from you, because in order to connect at that level, you have to be a separate person. Parents have often asked me in seminars, for example, why do I place so much emphasis on communication? And that's really interesting that they picked that up, because I hope that you picked that up today, that these are not just a series of behavioral techniques where you go change behavior. We want behavior change. But these are techniques designed to get to the hearts and minds and soul of our children, and when they share that with us, something magical happens. One of the primary problems of kids who constantly underachieve is a kind of unresolved dependency need. Now, when a child or someone with that need confesses themselves, they relate to you at that deep communication level. They feel intensely connected. And at the same time they feel connected, they feel like they are their own person because they're communicating from within themselves. They're talking about me, I feel these things. These are my motives. This is what's driving me. I understand myself better. So they're automatically independent. So at the same time there's a connection, there's also an independence. And by communicating at those deeper levels, level 3 and 4, you are automatically creating the kind of independence they will need to overcome their problem. That's why I place a lot of emphasis on communication. That's why I want you to be good listeners and ask good questions. Well, now here toward the end, I'd like to deal with some questions that I typically get from audiences around the country whenever I'm giving a talk. Now, one of the questions I get is, Dr. Whitley, what is ADD, and are these methods useful in working with children with those problems? Well, let me explain. ADD is a shorthand for attention deficit disorder, meaning that there is a brain problem, usually located probably in the frontal lobe, where children cannot recruit attention easily. They're very impulsive, sometimes hyperactive, but not necessarily. It is my opinion that most underachievers are not kids with attention deficit disorder. However, counseling is essential. If kids with ADD they're usually gonna have a lot of emotional blocks for school because they've been punished a lot just in the environment of school. School requires you to sit still and focus, and they've had trouble doing that. I work with about 20, 25, maybe 30% of the kids that I see have been diagnosed, and I think some of them legitimately diagnosed as having attention deficit disorder or hyperactivity. The techniques that I've talked about are extremely valuable as counseling focused techniques to help kids learn to overcome whatever impulsivity is left over after they take medication, help them learn to focus and achieve. The positive parenting aspect is really important, as well as communication with these kids. I'll never forget one of the first families I saw. The father ran a steel company here in town, and he shared with me that as a child he had been hyperactive, but his parents had not used medication. They had been very kind, very consistent in discipline. They were non-punitive, and helped him channel all that excessive energy, and it took him till his teenage years, channel that energy into achievement drive. So initially his grades weren't too good in schools, a lot of behavior problems, but his parents, of course he was an older man, his parents had helped structure his life so that he could eventually take control of his own energy level. So that answers the ADD question. I have other questions about learning disabled youngsters. Learning disabilities are quite real, and it depends on where the learning disability hits a youngster's life. Some learning disabilities are in the language development area. That's one of the worst areas to have. Disabilities in reading, writing, or using language to solve life's problems is difficult for kids who have to go through school. They're going to find school upsetting, they're going to find school punishing, and they're going to develop, on top of the learning disability, they will develop emotional, motivational blocks to even being in school. They're going to hate it, they're not going to like it. So they'll still need to overcome and learn how to work. Now, learning disabilities can be moderate to mild, it can be very circumscribed. Just because a child has a learning disability is no reason to give up on them. Remember my example earlier in the tapes about the child who couldn't spell because he had a learning disability. He overcame the emotional side of that disability and learned to spell. As a matter of fact, he excelled in school. Remember my example about the youngster who was extremely bright? He also had a learning disability, but he was able to overcome it and achieve anyway. By the way, both kids had at least 1.5 to 2 years of specialized learning training and compensatory learning styles so that they could do well in school but still weren't doing well. And they weren't doing well not because they didn't have new skills, but because they weren't applying them, and that was a motivational problem. So if you have a child with a learning disability or with an ADD problem, you need professional assistance to help understand where the motivation begins and where the neurological problems or the learning problems are, and help you differentiate those and work with you. Now, another question that I often get from parents, they'll ask me, Dr. Whitley, isn't bad grades, don't bad grades just happen normally? Isn't it just a normal thing kids go through sometimes? When do we need to think in terms of this being a problem that we need to pay a lot of attention to? And that is an excellent question. First of all, there's a kind of confusion generally and in the world out there among all parents and sometimes counselors. Normal is not a synonym for healthy. Just because a lot of kids are doing something doesn't mean that that's a healthy thing and a vital thing and a good thing for kids to be doing. Now, estimates that I have when I give a seminar to teachers and I ask them, based on my description of what an underachiever is, how many kids in your classroom are underachieving? These are normal classrooms, middle class schools, sometimes private schools, and they'll say, well, anywhere from 20 to 50% of the kids are having trouble getting ordinary work done, and the grades fall significantly below those kids' potential. And that's a lot of kids. That's a lot of kids. Now, some of those kids are going to have temporary problems. In other words, they've gone to a new school, something happens in the family, the grades fall. Something precipitates a problem with grades and learning. I am not as worried about that as sort of temporary problems where the kids work and pull themselves out of it. What I focus on is chronicity. How long has it been going on? So if something starts in the 4th grade and kids have a bad period, but 5th grade they pulled out of it and are doing well and never comes back, no worries. But when a youngster's behavior is such that the grades continue to fall, the grades are simply a symptom, but they tell you what's happening. The grades begin to fall. Sometimes they just get worse and worse and worse as time goes on. Sometimes they just stay the same. When something has gone on for more than a year, that's when I began to consider this is a significant problem, and it's probably not just going to go away by itself.